Right, welcome to the first episode of the Vicinity podcast. I'm Henry Jinman from Vicinity, and I'm joined by Dr. Julie Grail of the Bids Business. Today we're diving into an exciting new development for business improvement districts in the UK, self-billing. Now, Julie's the expert in this field who has already helped the bid in Worcester to implement this solution. Together we are launching a pilot scheme to help more bids collect their own levy with self-billing, and it felt like doing a podcast was quite a good medium in which to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, and if lots of people listen to this and like it, maybe I can convince Julie to come back and us to report on the progress and via a podcast again. So welcome, Julie. Hello.
Hello, Henry.
Why don't we start, let's dive right in, and why don't we start with a bit of an overview of levy collection in an ideal world. How should it work? The relationship between the bids and the businesses, and how should they go about collecting the levy currently as it is today?
Right, okay. It seems so simple, doesn't it? But anybody running bids will appreciate it's just not as easy as it seems. And I think if I step back a moment, the principle of bids is about us being a management organisation that works for the businesses. Bids are established by businesses for businesses. We're the management team that deliver for them. And we're providing services to them for a fee, and the charge, the bid levy, is the charge for those services. And yet there's such a disconnect when the levy bill is issued by a local authority or a third party on their behalf, but by a local authority, and is then landed with a business without necessarily a sense of relationship between that bill and the service they receive from the bid themselves. And so how it actually works at the moment is a bill is issued annually. It comes from a local authority or their outsourced provider. Sometimes it comes with business rate. As bids, we generally say don't do that, keep it separate. And it comes with a council logo on, as well as a bid logo. And in many cases feels like a council bill, not a bid bill. That's kind of my first concern in a way. But then it essentially is, it goes through a collection process, and it often falters. Often the timing is poor. Often the data is inaccurate. Often the first reminders, the sort of soft enforcement, is slow or absent. And then often the formal enforcement is slow or inaccurate. And so it leads us to kind of have a fairly clunky system. And from a bids point of view, we've got very limited funds. We're running on an annual financial process. Our cash flow is critical to us. We need to know the cash is going to come in to deliver services.
And so if I take you back to that relationship between the council and a third party provider, so when I've spoke to some bids about this, my understanding is this is often an add-on to an existing service that a third party is providing, usually who's collecting the business rates, and therefore is it a priority for them, or is it seen as, do they want to be doing this?
Yeah, really good question. And I think at both levels, the bid levy collection and enforcement process is in legislation requiring the duty to sit with a local authority, but there are no targets or measures associated with the staff delivering that service. It is an add-on to their role already. Whilst there are measures and indicators in place for business rates teams in councils to deliver against business rates, they have no measures or indicators against them to collect bid levy. So that already puts you bottom of the pile. When it's then to a third party collector as well, even more so, it's either a specific priced bolt on to a contract or a line in a contract, but has no performance measures against it. And certainly when we're in the, I think we've all known this for a long time, but when we're in the pandemic period, and we're under so much pressure, and local authority business rates departments were giving grants to businesses, and they were so busy and under pressure, it became so self-evident that the bid levy was absolutely bottom of the list, if it was even on the list. And that does give us problems, because it makes that kind of negotiation with a local authority to deliver for us and to deliver in a timely fashion really difficult. And putting myself in the position of a local authority, it makes it difficult for them too, because actually they are paid a price for it. It is a contract to a bid through an operating agreement, but when they're under real resource pressures, are they measured on it? No, they're not. So it's always going to be on the bottom of someone's list.
So let's dig into those problems a bit more that's with the current process, because it's the way I've come into this has been talking to our customers, and the first customer that set me on this path was one who was trying to collect something in the region to 250, 300k per year, and it was costing them 20k, I think between 20 and 25k, and now they were looking at an alternative solution. So the cost was the thing that opened my eyes to it, because if I was a business in that bid, I think I'd be appalled that just collecting that revenue was costing almost 10% of the total bid's budget. But then actually when I spoke to you, you kind of said, that isn't even the biggest issue, Henry. Look at some of these other things. Let's dig into those. So you mentioned data. What's wrong with the data? Why? Because people will talk about quite good collection rates, won't they? So I've collected 96%. What's wrong with some of those statements?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You know, price is one issue. Interestingly, just to kind of track back a moment on price, in the early years of bids, quite a few local authorities were collecting the levy for free. There was no charge on a bid, but in fact, what we were saying was, or I would say to bids, no, you need a charge because you need a relationship. You need a contractual relationship. Say, I pay you this much a year, you do need to do this for us.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, you need a charge. But there's been no real guidelines on what that charge should be, and what we did in the very early days was created the concept of kind of industry guidance, and industry guidance was £35 per unit per hereditament as a maximum, or 3% of levy income, whichever is the lower. So as you say, you know, if you're at touching 10% of levy income, you've really got to question whether that is right and proper from a bid perspective and from a business perspective. And so when you get into those basics of data, I have some bids telling me, oh, the local authority collection's fine, and they get, as you say, a 96% collection or whatever. My question back is, it's 96% of what? How accurate is the list? And now, dare I be a bit facetious, some bids will say to me, well, I don't know, that's not my problem, it's the local authority's problem. It absolutely is the bid's problem, because the bid needs to be sure every business that's active in that area within their levy rules is being billed. And you only know that if you keep on top of the list. And sadly, in so many cases, that list isn't accurate. So it might have been actually 106% capacity, but they only got, 96 of it. So data accuracy, first and foremost, ensures not only are we raising bills for every hereditament in that place, but also is it getting to the right place?
Yeah, and we see this all the time. So we see this with when we're importing levy lists into the Vicinity system, and it's not uncommon for us to identify either businesses that haven't been billed. I think Simon in one case identified a business or for a bid, a selection of businesses which hadn't been billed up to 50k in one particular year. And this is something that regularly happens. I was speaking to one bid the other day who said that they had a business up in arms because they'd received a bill for, I think it was 4 or 5 years, backdated, of 180k in one go. And he had the bizarre scenario where I think he was trying to say, look, this isn't reasonable, but the local authority was still pressing to collect it. Some other sort of stories I've heard were one where the building was claimed as a warehouse, but actually wasn't, and therefore wasn't being collected the same amount. Or another who, the bill was sent out to a person owned 3 businesses in a town. The bill was sent to each of those 3 businesses. The person owned all 3. He paid it all together, but the system only recognised that as one payment, and they chased and sent court summonses to the other 2 businesses. So there seems like a whole litany of ways in which, if you don't have the right data, are the bills going to the right place, to the right person? Are you missing out on levy? I mean, that's the...
Yeah, and there's something about, so a couple of years ago, I presented at a Bid Foundation summit in Manchester, when we first launched the Worcester self-billing, when we first got it off the ground, and myself and Sam McCarthy, the chief executive of Worcester Bid, presented there. And what I showed, pictures tell 1,000 words, and what I showed was the concept of the difference between business rates and bid levy billing, and I showed a continuous daisy chain for business rates and single daisies for bid terms. And what I mean by that is, from a business rate point of view, it's an ongoing tax. It's been an ongoing tax for 40 odd years. It's an ongoing tax day in, day out on a daily charge, and it doesn't matter to the charging authority when they do that clawback, when they do that catch up, because the money is just this continuous collection regime, and it goes back on a formula, it goes back to government and then comes back on to a local authority on a formula. And the people that collect it, and indeed the authority that then operates on its money when it comes back, it just doesn't matter to them whether it's accurate or not, because it's not their direct income. They're merely an agency to collect money into government to then reallocate back up on an entirely different formula. So it's a continuous daisy chain. Businesses change in and out, values change in and out. But actually, it's not time sensitive. It doesn't matter to anybody when that clawback's done. Get to bids and think single daisy, because we're in a term. It really matters. And from a bid perspective, in terms of delivery, we've got maximum 5 years. We're contracting we've got staff, we're contracting with offices, we're contracting with services. It absolutely matters when our cash flow is there. And it absolutely matters from a business point of view when they pay and don't pay, because the service is direct. The service is now. It's not historic. And what we did years ago was built in the concept of having a closed financial rule in each financial year for bids, to say, look, we're collecting for this purpose for this year, and then for the next year, and then for the next year, and not allowing this long-term clawback, because it can happen both ways. And it happened in central London in the early days. A very big bid with a very big retailer who got a very significant rating appeal success and managed to claw back, not just within term for the bid, but in a previous term. We absolutely argued it shouldn't have been able to happen, and created a £250,000 budget hole in that bid. Now, big bid, so big money, but still massive hole. We can't run bids like that. It just can't operate like that. So we've got to think more logically about what businesses are we delivering to now and are benefiting from our service now, and are we billing them? We can't have this historic thing. And I too have loads of examples like that, as you've described, where a bid's come, as I've talked about this, and then they've come back to me and said, we've just found that, so-and-so business hasn't been billed 3 years and it amounts to £16,000. What should we do? And there's sort of a moral argument, there's a sort of ethical argument, and there's an accuracy argument. And partly it's, what do your levy rules say? If you can't actually bill back, it's tough, you've missed it, but more for you that you've missed it. So there is this massive data accuracy point that bids have to own, and they have to take responsibility, irrespective of whether they're looking at self-billing. They should own their data first and foremost.
And part of this problem is solvable, part of it's a little difficult, right? Because I guess there's always the delay in between the valuation office and getting the information that somebody's moved out or moved into a building, etc. Often the bid might know that first because they're on the ground, they might see that and be able to flag it. But some of this is solvable. I think part of the solutions that we provide are to compare your lists with the local lists, and that's why we can identify when people are missing billing, and why we felt we were in a position to try and help and do something about this, because I think we both agree and feel quite passionately that this is something that there should be an alternative solution for. So let's talk a bit about that alternative solution, because it already exists. It already exists thanks to you and Sam and Worcester. So how can we solve this? What's an alternative to the current status quo?
Yeah, and as you say, it absolutely exists. We launched Worcester's self-billing 2 financial years ago. We're in year 3 now, and it's great. It's working really well. It's absolutely owned by the bid team, and it's really straightforward, and it's just not as tricky and complicated as people might think or might consider. And just to sort of go back a step, why Worcester? I was working in Worcester in a kind of interim capacity, working with the team there, doing a variety of different things. One of the things I identified whilst there was a poor collection service in terms of not just actual income recovery, but timing, and therefore also cash flow, big impact on cash flow, and just a real disconnect between...
Timing as in it was taking a long time to
get the levy. Two things. So timing in terms of getting off the starting blocks. So despite best efforts, the immediate pre-billing year to our self-billing year, and I was on site in that bid, and despite my best efforts, we were ready to go. They're an April billing cycle. We were ready to go on the 11th of March. Everything was done. From our side, we'd done the data accuracy checks. We had created the billing leaflet. Everything was ready to go. From their side, the bills didn't go out until 28th of May for no real apparent reason other than resource and it being back bottom of the list, going back to our earlier point.
So that would be meant to go out beginning of April.
Well, meant to be liable from 1st of April, but we were ready to go 11th of March so that it was ahead of time. And so we had no chance of getting any money in till beyond the 28th of May. So already we're 2 months behind on cash flow.
The bid has bills, the bid has plans, there's a business plan to deliver against.
So that really spurred us to say, come on, we need to move on with this. This is just not good enough. And we went through a series of steps. And in essence, the first fundamental step is about the legislation. I had already done a lot of work in central London a few years back, identifying a means to do this. Because for years, I'd had this kind of inclination in my mind that if I could prove local authorities didn't have a monopoly, we would have a better bargaining chip. So it's not that I want every bid to collect their own levy, because actually in many cases local authorities are doing it great, or indeed local authorities could do it better if there was a better negotiation. But whilst you're in a position where there's a sense that there's a monopoly and you have no alternative provider, from a bid perspective you just have to work at their pace, and that's difficult and frustrating. I've spent a lot of time with a lot of bids doing that. So my kind of essence was, if I can deliver it somewhere and prove it's achievable, I create two things. A, I create the confidence that many others can do the same, but B, and equally important, I create the bargaining chip that bids need to negotiate on their service quality from a local authority. And so the legislation that we use, and it's so straightforward and completely clear, is when bids were established, an additional contracting out order was created through government legislation that enables a local authority to legitimately contract their outsourced provider to take on that duty for them. So if they already outsource their business rate collection and they're going to outsource their bid levy to it, it gave them the ability through that contract and out order. So what I did was said, okay, with some lawyers at the time, what's stopping us using another outsourced provider? It doesn't require us to go to the same one, so presumably we could go to anyone. We tested that out in central London. We went through a load of legal steps, and we proved that yes, assuming a local authority through that contracting out order is willing to authorise another to take on that duty on their behalf as their agent, anyone could do it. So that means a bid can do it, but equally it means someone else could do it. So I had created a concept in central London, which we haven't gone ahead with, but for entirely different reasons, that it could easily be another agent. We were going to use a commercial property agent who already collected service charge in a whole swathe of central London, and in effect did exactly that billing process, but for a different purpose. And we could have contracted out, to them. They could have been the agent. In many cases, particularly in small to medium-sized bids, they'd actually much rather do it themselves. It's easy to do it themselves. So for Worcester, the Worcester Council have nominated the bid as their agent. We've effectively turned the operating agreement on its head, and I've created a levy collection agreement where effectively the local authority create the concept that the bid is their agent and is going to act on this contract to deliver back to them. And we've turned the kind of reporting back, so the bid collects, they report to their own board, and those reports then come back into the local authority to prove the collection is being done and that it's at a suitable level. There are some, termination clauses in there if it doesn't work out for either side. But in essence, the bid is doing what an outsourced provider used to do, with some clear things in place. What we also did in that process was we built in some principles to ensure due diligence was done. So in that contract and in that development with Worcester Council, we ensured that the bid could demonstrate they were robust enough, their systems were robust enough. We already had a really strong engagement sort of system in place in terms of data accuracy. We already had an online accounting software system in place that was really clear and accurate and well managed. We already had a regular local accountant who was preparing management accounts for us on a quarterly basis. So our data and our accounting systems are really, really sort of strong. And we already had an annual audit that demonstrated the full process was annually audited and that all of our systems were clear and to a relevant quality. The additional piece that we then put into the jigsaw that we built into the agreement was that we then spoke to our insurers to ensure that we were suitably covered within our insurance policy, that we had this extra service covered. Now, interestingly, when we spoke to the insurers, they rendered no more risk because already our systems were so clear. It was just more transactions. It was no different. It was just more transactions. So all of that process was surprisingly easy once the local authority had, and quite rightly, heavily scrutinised me to ensure that I could answer everything and be challenged and go through everything. And when we put all of those things sort of in place, the kick-off really was once each of those elements was discussed, debated and sort of concluded, it went into the levy collection agreement. The levy collection agreement got signed, and then we went through all the checking of two things. First is the data side of it from a billing list point of view. Now, to be honest, for Worcester, that was no different. We'd been doing it anyway because the data was so inaccurate. We had owned that data previously, so we just did the same process again. The second one was then the documentation. So the documentation from a bill invoice point of view and a billing leaflet point of view still looks exactly the same as it did before, but better. And when I say exactly the same, because it still has all the ownership is with the local authority, because it must, because they're the ones that have the duty. We're just the provider. Better because it allowed us to just take a red pen over all the repetition and the poor language and the poor grammar and things, and we just rewrote it, and it was better. So it was more business friendly. So when they receive it, it feels more relevant to the bid. It's an interesting
point, because one of the objections I've heard raised to this has been, oh, well, the bill comes from the local authority, it has the local authority's logo on it, so people take it more seriously. But what you're saying there is
it still does.
Yeah. It's just a different provider by essentially outsourcing it back to the bid. And I guess moving us on to the pilot then that we've announced is really about catalysing the industry a bit, moving this along and removing some of those extra barriers, I think, because when you start talking about audit processes, when you start talking about data and accuracy, this is the kind of world which I and Vicinity live in, where we're looking at this and going, well, we've got a system which holds all of this data already. If we can connect this to, a financial accounting system, there are audit trails built in, there are lots of this stuff exists, and we can report on it and make the reporting really easy back for the bid as well. And that's the aim now. And from your perspective, what does the pilot bring that develops this past Worcester and to the wider bid world?
Yeah, I mean, in essence, the pilot is about saying this is now a workable solution.
It's a blueprint.
It's there. It's proven. It's 2 years in. It was easy actually in year one of Worcester to prove a better cash flow on the basis of what I said. The pre-billing year, they didn't even get bills out till the 28th of May. Well, of course, in our first billing year, we got them out on that week in March when we were meant to. So the collection rate pre-1st of April was fabulous, you know, before even legally off kind of first blocks. And then by end of May, we were well up exceeding their collection rate. That was all good. The other kind of pieces of that jigsaw, interestingly, though, is in terms of Worcester and then going into the pilots, you know, there's a series of things that you can quite easily improve that improves everything, not just the speed of collection, not just the level of recovery of money, but also the relationship with the businesses. And you talked about the delays of the VOA data coming through to local authority earlier, and then the local. So there's two delays in that system. One is the VOA takes time to upload data onto their own system, onto the rating list, which is open source now, and anyone can go and look at that data. It's a bit clunky still because the data is only manual access, so per entry, and that's one of the benefits of Vicinity, that you allow the ability to then do that full crossover of an entire list rather than single manual checking. The second delay is into the local authority. How long does it take the local authority on a fortnightly basis when they get that data to actually upload it into their system? Now, I'm not going to broad brush say all local authorities are good or bad, but I know some, I've operated in some where they are from data on the ground, you know, action on the ground to data on the list, they're 18 months behind. That's just crazy.
And that's avoidable.
That is avoidable. Yeah. So then the third bit of that data quality thing is when we then do our own data for billing lists, not only are we making sure those two delays are fast tracked, as it were, but what we're also checking is who the bill payer is. And what we were finding in the Worcester work in the pre-billing year, when we were really scrutinising it, is too many bills were going to the wrong, you know, going to the right business, but to the wrong person in that business. Right. So there was just admin failure, not unwillingness to pay, not inability to pay, just admin failure. So, you know, we did a huge amount of work, and I say the royal we because actually it was Sam and team did all of that data crunching of one by one going into businesses saying, okay, should you be getting the bill? At the moment we've got this person, who pays this bill in reality? So loads of that data work was, let's make sure the bill goes to the right person first time round. And then secondly, and this is so obvious and yet so many businesses, so many bids don't get this done because the local authority won't do it, we created digital bills from day one. So because it's coming out of an online software system, not only have we created that invoice in a very easy user-friendly way and it's linked in an email, so it's view invoice from the email, or it's a PDF on the invoice, and then we also, belt and braces, do a hard copy invoice as well. So there's 3 attempts to pay from that first one. And the other bit of that is, and it's a clunky thing that people don't think about until you look at this data well, is many businesses or organisations across a bid will have more than one bill because they've got more than one legitimate. In the council system, because it just comes wholly out of a local authority system, if they've got 5 hereditaments, they get 5 bills. On our system, they've got 5 hereditaments. They're one, each of those lines on a bill, they get 1 bill. So there's no straggling invoices to chase. They pay all 5 or they pay none and we chase. So that cleans the thing up so much as well. And all of those pieces of the jigsaw just help us make that direct relationship from the bid to as a service provider to the levy payers as recipient of that service so much cleaner, and it professionalizes it. And you know, one of our problems often with bid delivery is we need to know the businesses well. We need them to understand why we're there, who we are, what we're doing, and why they're paying us. And it's really hard to answer all of that when all of that noise is happening in the public sector side and it's clunky. So the principle of this pilot is helping tidy up all of those little pieces of the jigsaw to get to a place where you have a better direct relationship with your businesses who you service in one way or another, and you're really clean and professional in the way they pay you. And why wouldn't you be? Because if you run your own business, Henry, you run your own business, so do I wouldn't work like this. Nobody would pay me, or they wouldn't pay me on time, or they wouldn't pay me the right amount, or, you know. So why wouldn't you act like that? And in Worcester's case, it's just connected us so much better. And allowed the businesses to understand why they're paying and what they're getting from it.
This is a really important point, because I've heard this from bid managers before. What would you say to someone who says, do you know what, it's just not my problem? This is, the council deals with that, they collect it for me. Almost I get a sense of having to discuss money with the businesses. It's kind of a dirty subject that I don't want to touch upon. I just leave that to them so I can get on with delivering what I want to deliver.
Yeah, and I've run a business for 20 odd years, so that's just not how I think.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's how bids should think, because as I said earlier, 96% of something, of an inaccurate list, is not 96% of achievable income. And if you don't know what achievable income is, and you're not prepared to delve into that and understand it and have that direct relationship, I just think you leave a lot of negative noise in your relationship with your business. And
well, that's it, isn't it? Relationship, isn't it? I spoke to one bid manager who said, the opposite, who said, I went and chased someone for a bill that I thought wasn't paid, and it turns out they had paid it, but the system just hadn't come through yet to let me know that they had. And that's damaging his relationship because of an inefficient collection system. Because ultimately, lots of bid managers will pick up the phone and will say, you do need to pay this, and like this. So you do get involved anyway, I think. So you do get drawn in. I think you can't avoid it. But the relationship I have as a business owner with my customers is one where it's really important for me to be able to talk about, this is the service we provide, there is a cost for this service, and that's
and I think it makes you much tighter on the quality and effectiveness of your services if you're opening yourself to be accountable to those that pay you. If you're distancing yourself so much, you've also got to then ask yourself and almost kind of, put the mirror back to yourself. Are your services effective enough to those customers? Are you actually concerned that really you don't want to talk money because you're not actually sure you're giving value? Well, that's not what bids are about either. And I feel like the bids that I work with, who have great relationships with their businesses and who are very transparent and accountable to their businesses, equally have great services that add value, because they're not shying away from that connection of, I'm doing this for you because it's making a difference to you, and that's why I'm proud that I'm charging you a fee that I know you're getting value for. If you shy away from that whole thing, question how valuable your services are.
That's it, a message from today. Don't get pulled into the blame game. Take responsibility. Let's face this head on and see if actually can we make this easier and better for bids across the country. So benefits we see then, if we just sort of run through them, we're saying faster collection potentially, we're saying more accurate data to run off, so hopefully you're not missing businesses are correctly categorized, people are receiving bills on time, to the right person, because the bid probably knows who those people are better than anyone. Better cash flow management, improving the relationships of the bid with its businesses. And then lastly, the thing that brought me to this in the first place, there might well be a benefit to cost as well.
And isn't that ironic, actually, that it's your last point now, not your first? And that's the sort of interesting thing for me. In Worcester, we saved a significant sum of money over the term of the bid in terms of levy collection charges. And it has been a real positive, but it wasn't the driver of it. So for them, their charge was £18,000 a year for billing, but we were struggling with anything else beyond billing. We didn't have digital bills, so we couldn't do any soft chase because we couldn't access a PDF to actually do it ourselves. So, it was a lot for not a great deal of service. And when you extrapolate that, it's nearly 100k in a term of a bid, in a bid that collects only 500k a year. It's a huge sum of money we have actually saved for that business that we've then delivered out, into projects on the ground. If I just kind of reflect on what does it cost Worcester now to do this in-house, we budgeted in the first year way more actually than we in fact used, because we were nervous about quite the level of intensity of work we would need on that first year of getting all the bills out and, just organising it all and, matching it all back. And, the interesting thing about anyone that uses an online software system knows that once your bills have been issued out of your software and it's back in your bank account, press one button to reconcile, match. Yeah. It's so easy. And the interesting thing about bid billing is because of it being a percentage against rateable value, virtually no bills are the same amount. So it's so easy to match. It's not like sending out 300 bills all at £2,000. They're all different. So the match is really, really easy. But that kind of connection in and back out has proved so easy. We budgeted a lot more than we needed to use our accountant, the bookkeeper, thinking there might be a lot more. We're now only budgeting annually £5,000 for the entire thing. That includes postage and envelopes and everything to do the whole thing. And we're doing it under budget. So we have saved so much. Yeah. But as you say, that's actually the bottom of the list rather than, in fact, the key driver of it. It's the useful benefit. It's the useful byproduct of it rather than necessarily the core driver.
And what would you say the impact was on time? Because I guess that could be a concern for people is it sounds like it could be a lot of time. I guess particularly in the first year, getting everything set up. I think we've got things and automations planned in the pilot that are going to help that. But with your experience with Worcester, how do you think they reflect on the time? Time well spent?
Time really well spent, and a really useful trigger to make it abundantly clear to all of the team that engagement with businesses is critical. So one of the things I hear bids saying a lot, actually, in nothing to do with billing, just deal with services, is not all staff necessarily think it's their job to know who the levy-payers are or to have a dialogue with them. And even some staff whose job it is to have a dialogue with levy-payers often find it uncomfortable or find it difficult to work out the trigger to start a conversation. Easiest trigger of all is billing, because that's the first relationship, is you're paying us this for this service. It just creates that connection immediately. It's just so easy.
Now let's have a conversation about what we're doing for you.
Yeah. So time, as I said, for Worcester, we just didn't even need anywhere near as much time as we thought we did in that first year. But now it's just a simple, integral part of what we do. And honestly, and I think probably a lot of listeners will appreciate this point if I try and make it not sound too facetious, but the time you spend chasing the inefficiencies of the current service can be so much better spent actually just doing your service.
It's time savings, yeah. That's true. I haven't touched on that. So we announced the pilot in May, mid-May. We're now end of July, and I think we've learnt some things already from doing that. The first thing is I feel slightly validated in putting it out there. We've had, I think, 28 bids who've put their hand up, which I think is a lot. I think that is indicative of a industry which is saying there's a problem here, we're interested in a solution. I guess out of those 28, and we're being quite strict, I'd say, we want to make sure that the first ones we take through this pilot go well. We want to make sure that we end up with something which we can effectively scale and roll out wider and easier. So we're being rightly cautious and with them. And we sort of had 5 criteria, didn't we, which we were looking at them and trying to decide who should we take forward onto this pilot. What would you say you've sort of learned from the conversations we've had so far with a wider number throughout the industry?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and you quote the 28, but what's interesting is there's at least 28 more beyond that who talked to me about it, but we didn't register their interest. So actually way more than that, probably realistically, same again, if not more than that. Huge amount of interest in it, and actually quite a lot of the people that spoke to me who didn't officially put expression of interest in, their first point was, we really want to do this, we really want to understand more. This is not the year, so we won't register our interest now. Will you do it again next year? So there's another whole backlog of people that are ready next year. I think the things that we learnt and heard from people are, none of them none of them are surprising to us and to you and I that have had all these conversations along the way. Firstly, there's a little bit of misunderstanding or lack of depth of understanding of all these things we've just been talking about. Some of the bids that approached me talked it through, and I went through the details of it, and they kind of stopped at first point because they hadn't appreciated the level of data understanding they would need to have. They'd perhaps been in that category that you described earlier of, oh, it's not my problem, local authority does it for me, and therefore hadn't looked in enough detail. Secondly, I think they then considered their own timing, and so did we with them. And, you know, there's some timing issues in terms of phasing that when you're on a ballot cycle, you've got to think quite carefully about when you'd talk about this and when you'd actively do it, because nothing should impact your ballot going ahead. Yeah. So that's just held a few, but we're holding them there, and we're hopefully phasing them post a successful ballot. A billing cycle as well, because those that are billing for April billing, this time of year works well for them, but those that are out of that financial year cycle, of which some are, it then creates a little bit of a mismatch. And I mean, I've got one where I'm working ahead of the pilot because they're ahead of that financial year. So we've learned a few things in terms of their perhaps lack of their own understanding of what's going to be required, and some timing issues. But probably the single most fundamental thing, which we made really clear in the kind of criteria, is quite easy commercially, really easy actually commercially, to get this concept through your own bid board, because it makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. You know, and businesses are on your board, and they're businesses, and they don't get why we do it how we do it. They don't like how we do it, so they go, yeah, of course you should do that. Why wouldn't you? The critical next step is then get the local authority buy-in, because as I said right at the beginning of this, the legislation that we're using requires a local authority to effectively discharge that duty via you as their agent. And if they're not going to agree for you to do this, we can't get off the starting blocks. So quite a few then paused and went, I haven't talked to my local authority yet, and we've sent them back in. Go and have that conversation. You know, we can give you some advice, we can give you some information, but you need to do that first. Yeah. And in some cases, then that's been quite an easy conversation where they're in dialogue and it's progressing. In some cases, and not surprising really, in some cases, a local authority then says, well, hold on a minute, what's wrong with our service? Are you criticising our service? Is that why you want to do it yourself? And that's creating a slightly longer dialogue.
We say that, but it's interesting. I thought it was interesting the fact that of that 28, some of those on that list were not bids themselves, were local authorities who were saying, actually, we think there's a better solution to us doing this. Yeah. And we're putting themselves on the list going, maybe we could work with some of our bids in our local area, which I thought was interesting.
And those ones are really interesting, actually. And those are some of the ones, as you know, that we're carrying on conversations with to work out what that might look like. You know, with local authorities that have multiple bids and therefore run billing across 3 or 4 or 5 places, and themselves from the, let's say, bid coordinator point of view, have problems with their own in-house business rates teams, are saying, oh my goodness, if you could take that problem away from me, that would be marvellous. So that's some of the conversation we're having, as you say, and that's a little bit, when those couple of cases that we're having, those progressing conversations, a little bit more complex in that there's some sort of politics, small p, in internal negotiations between the departments. But I'm absolutely sure some of those will progress, and they might not progress, again, the timing point, they might not progress as quick as they'd like and we'd like, because it's just a few steps to get through. And anything that's, you know, fundamental change to service, we know, anyone that works for local authorities knows, there's a lead in time to deciding if fundamentally they could do it and they want to do it. Then how do they approve and authorise that? Then if it has to go through a committee cycle, what committee and what's the lead in time? And you've lost 6 months in all of that dialogue. So, you know, one of the messages to those listening is, don't underestimate how long that takes. It
Yeah.
isn't just overnight. It does take time. And that's part of that conversation we're doing with a number of these 28 to say, we can help you through that. We can give you some information, but you need to lead that process, and it doesn't happen overnight.
I think I had this nice, perfect timeline in my mind where, we'd announce it in May, we'd work with them over this period, and we'd send out all the bills for all, up to 5 that we were going to have on the pilot in March. I think the reality is we're going to have to be a bit more flexible in our timelines and phase it, as you say, with the customers that we're seeing, so that we can fit in with these other obstacles that they've got to overcome. Timing within their ballot cycle and getting approval from the councils. But I suppose that's the message for today that we want bids to hear, isn't it? It's, if you're interested in this, start those conversations. If you want some pointers, get in touch with us. Make sure we know so that we can look at our plans and how we're trying to run these phases and when we might be able to roll it out to you. And anything else?
Yeah, it just made me think of a final thing that perhaps I should say, not you, Henry, is I'm doing this pilot with Vicinity. Why am I doing this pilot with Vicinity? Well, I'm doing it because you approached me, and you had obviously, as you said at the beginning, had these things raised with you and had these queries, and you were being, I guess, innovative and inquiring in the way that you are to say, well, gosh, this doesn't make a lot of sense. What could we do about it? So when we talk about the 28 registered with us and the 28 plus more talk to us about it, that's a proportion of the industry that one of our criteria is, well, if you're not with Vicinity, you're not in our pilot, because it's a pilot with Vicinity. And actually that was some of the conversations I had with those that didn't register because they're not with you yet. Right. I think it's been an interesting conversation that they, as we know, some of them are now joining you to enable them to get off first blocks with data, to enable them then later to come onto this pilot. Because for some, it made them question their data isn't even off the starting blocks. They don't have a legitimate database system. And for some, they realised they needed to understand the capacity that Vicinity could provide for them. And so whether or not they were doing billing or not, actually they should join Vicinity. So without that sounding like a sales pitch for you, I think that was interesting for me actually to say to them, well, no, you can't be on the Vicinity pilot if you're not with Vicinity. Sorry, go and carry on the conversation.
Pragmatic more than anything. We need the data in a system. We need to have some sense of your data's good, high quality, high accuracy, and then we can integrate it into another one.
And it's a critical precursor, to be able to self-bill is to have accurate data. So it makes a huge amount of sense, which is why we've joined ourselves together. But I think secondly, we also thought quite long and hard about software accounting systems as well, so that we made people think about their own invoicing systems already, and we broadly, without particularly naming brands, but we broadly felt that we would probably go with one, and that would be Xero, because that's most bids are with Xero, but not all of them were Xero.
I would be really interested to know because we've had one who's on Sage, and we've had one who's on QuickBooks. Now, it just doesn't make economic sense for us to build integrations into external financial accounting systems for one customer unless they're willing to pay for it. So if there are others, I would want to know that, because otherwise it looks firmly like we will go with Xero, and probably stick with Xero, because that everyone else that we spoke to has been on Xero. Absolutely.
And I think one of the things that's just worth saying, because I'm conscious I haven't said it yet, is just in terms of the actual mechanics of the money. Whereas with local authority billing, it goes into a bid revenue account in the local authority, and then the money is transferred across to the bid. And in fact, that's one of the problems, because often it isn't transferred regularly enough. For self-billing, you are creating that within your own bid bank account, and so you're matching the money right through into your own bank account straight away. And having Xero already connected into your own bank account makes that reconciliation so easy and so straightforward. So when you've reconciled, you literally have the money in your own account and you're not chasing out somebody's, money elsewhere. So that's the other piece of the jigsaw that, we're trying to just ensure that all of this process is so clean and accurate and systematized using your data knowledge and your software experts as well as our bid knowledge, so that the whole thing is really streamlined. It makes for a really streamlined business model for collecting. What is it? It's your income. It's your primary income. And that's where I just don't buy the argument that it's not my problem, it's the local authority. It absolutely is your problem because it's your money.
Yeah. And it's going to be a massive benefit to you. Well, that seems like a brilliant point to finish on, and to thank you for coming and doing this podcast with me. The first one I've ever done, the first one you've ever done as well.
It's not my first.
Oh,
but,
really?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert.
I think it only remains to say, if this is useful and has been, please do let us know. Because we might do another one. But if you don't, we won't. So
Absolutely.
It's up to you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, how do I stop it?